What's up, guys? Welcome to the Light and Lamp Podcast. This is our first ever live streamed podcast.
Breaking new ground, man.
Today, if I can spell, we are doing a live podcast for charity. And let me make some tweets. And we're just going to be talking about some recent news. Henrik Lundqvist, longtime Rangers goalie, has announced his retirement. He didn't play at all last year due to a heart condition. Kind of an unfortunate way to end his career. But as a Rangers fan, just what does Henrik Lundqvist mean to you?
I mean, I think it says a lot that they immediately announced his jersey's getting retired, like almost instantly. So, I mean, he was the team, like he was the whole team for a long time.
So, what did he mean, like, as his ethos? Like,
You mean like what is like emotionally like out more than the game?
Yeah.
I mean, the guy's gonna go down as probably the greatest Ranger of all time. I mean, he means everything to the Rangers. Because you could until the end, you could count on him to really keep you in games you had no business being in for a long stretch of time.
Yeah.
It's kind of a crime they never won a Stanley Cup, but it happens.
What does he mean to the game in general, like into the city
sense?
of New York? Start with New York. What did he mean to the city, and then you can kind of talk about his impact on the game, as a whole.
I think what he means to New York, honestly, is he lives here. He comes back here every year, no matter what. So this is now his second home, So he works hard in the community. He's big into charity, the Henrik Lundqvist Foundation, and he works a lot with the Garden of Dreams Foundation specifically. And I wouldn't be surprised if he manages, you find him getting a job with that charity specifically afterwards because of his familiarity with them. But they always said, Garden of Dreams representatives always said that if you needed somebody to come to an event, you always called Henrik because he would never say no. He always was happy to do it. So I think that says a lot about what he means to New York and the community. What he means back home, I mean, I can only imagine. He's got to be a national hero, right? Gold medalist in 2006, greatest, 400 wins, top 10 winningest goaltender of all time. I think he's the all-time winningest Swedish-born goaltender. It's got to be I don't know, Babe Ruth or something to us, just a legend, a titan of the game.
What is your favorite Henrik Lundqvist moment or memory? Not even, doesn't necessarily even have to be on the ice, but just, or it could be, But what's your favorite memory moment in Henrik Lundqvist's career?
I think it has to be 2014, that playoff run. I've never seen somebody so determined and locked in to carry a team night after night, the Rangers were good that year, and so me saying he carried them is kind of would be kind of strange to say to a lot of people, but the reality is there were games in some of those playoff. I mean, they were down 3-1 to the Pittsburgh Penguins in the second round of that Stanley Cup playoff run. They came back to win, and it was mostly because Henrik Lundqvist managed to be an absolute animal for the last 4 games and reverse sweep them. I'll never forget that. I'll never forget in 2015 him holding the team. I mean, they went up, they were down 2-0. He managed to hold the Capitals off. The Rangers tied the game, and then they win it in overtime, to get another reverse sweep. It was just unbelievable. The guy was just unstoppable when he wanted to win.
Yeah, I think, no doubt. I mean, there's no doubt he's a Hall of Famer, right?
Oh, first ballot, easy.
there's no doubt in my mind anyway. I don't care that he only has one Vezina trophy. If nothing else, all that tells you about Henrik Lundqvist is the fact that he played in an era where there were just so many elite goaltenders. Like, it's not his fault he happened to be playing in the same era as Pekka Rinne, Jonathan Quick, even though Quick never won a Vezina either. But, Rinne, Quick, Fleury, who, again, he never won one either. But, these guys are taking votes away from him, essentially, right?
Ben Bishop in Tampa Bay at the time.
Yeah, Rinne, Fleury, Bishop, Quick, even Crawford every now and then. He was playing in an era where we were blessed, really. Carey Price, obviously, Hart Trophy winner. Playing in an era where we were just blessed with several amazingly talented goaltenders. So I don't really care that he really only won the one Vezina. And
what's worth pointing out about that, though? He had top 5 finishes in 9 straight seasons.
Yeah, so, the guy was clearly always on top of the game, There was no doubt.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, not for nothing, also widely, sports writers widely credit him being the best goaltender in the league at the time, arguably. So, if that tells you anything, even though he only has the one Vezina, everybody that was around and watched the game was like, yeah, no, he's clearly the best. He's just on a different level right now.
Thank you for the follow, whoever just followed. We're doing some live hockey talk. We're talking about Henrik Lundqvist. It's obviously for, what he means to me as an Islander fan is just years and years of frustration, honestly, having to deal with this guy constantly, essentially. Just every time we were playing the Rangers, you knew for the most part, unless there was some oddity in a back-to-back schedule or something, that Henrik Lundqvist was going to be in net. And despite the Islanders really not being that good for most of Henrik Lundqvist's career, arguably, you always wanted to beat him. You always want to beat your rivals. You always want to beat the Rangers. But he was just so hard to do. And as a result of the Islanders not being very good for the most part, I ended up watching a lot of Rangers hockey. And I don't really want to say I ever rooted for the New York Rangers, because I didn't. But I came to really, really respect him as a player. People make the arguments like, oh, he was whiny, he was a princess or whatever, but I mean, there was nobody on the ice that wanted to win more than Henrik Lundqvist. So yeah, of course he's going to get fired up, he's going to get competitive. I mean, I'm the same way, and I'm not even a professional player. When you want to win as badly as he does, sometimes that comes out as frustration when it doesn't happen. So I never really saw him as the prima donna that everyone makes him out to be. I just saw him as, highly elitely competitive, an absolute brick wall when he was on his game, and he was very, very rarely off his game ever during his prime. I would honestly say top 2 during his entire career. The only one that maybe ever rivaled him, honestly, was Carey Price, and based on the fact that Carey Price's later career hasn't been... Carey Price kind of had a shorter peak in terms of his, true dominance, where, I mean, Carey Price is still a top 10 goalie, but I would honestly say for his era, Henrik Lundqvist was probably the best goalie in the NHL. There were years where certain guys might have been better than him for 1 year, but when you look across the span of a career, I mean, he won 30 straight games. He won 30 games in 10 straight seasons or something like that?
Yeah, and he's the only goaltender to win 20 plus NHL games in 12 straight seasons or something.
There was no stopping this guy during his era. I mean, look, say what you want about
the later era.
Say what you want about the Rangers being a super defensive team during his era. It doesn't matter. I mean, you have to look at the quality of the saves he was making. And sure, those Rangers teams very rarely gave up grade A opportunities, but even when they did, Henrik Lundqvist was still making 10 bell saves left, right, and center. So he's definitely, in my opinion, the best of his era.
Didn't you do the math like on what his like save percentage like broke down to be actually? Like his expected save percentage versus his actual save percentage like a long time ago?
It was comparing players, like if they played as many games as Martin Brodeur, where they would rank.
Oh, okay.
I don't remember where he ended up on that list, but I'm pretty sure he was in like second or third for all the categories. So, I mean, there's just, there's not much you can really say about him besides he was the Rangers. When people talked about the New York Rangers, he was the name that came to mind. And it's a shame that he's going to leave the NHL without a Stanley Cup. But, he's got that gold medal, and that's got to mean a lot to him. And he's leaving, I think, at a decent time. I'm kind of glad he's deciding to kind of take the the signs from his body and say, this is kind of it, right? You don't really like to see those elite players desperately trying to hold on to what they used to have and kind of being super subpar for the whole entire end of their career. I think this is a good time for him to walk away, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I read was the doctor says he was going to need another like 10 to 12 months of recovery because there's still some inflammation by his heart from the surgery. So like it's just not worth. I mean, I just think honestly, outside of like the whole like listening to your body, it's just not viable for him at this point. Like taking 2 years off of like playing at the highest level at almost 40 years old, it's not like doing it when you're 21, 22, where your body can bounce back, you can get back into that shape and be the athlete you used to be. So I think it's just smart. Like there's no reason to taint his legacy or like to tarnish it like Brodeur did, when he went to St. Louis and was just absolutely subpar and ended up retiring kind of unceremoniously on them. So I'm glad he's just saying, you know what? I'm done. I didn't get my cup. That's okay. I finished top 10 all time in wins, and I'm happy with what I did.
In a weird, twisted sort of way, it's almost like it was fate for him to have to run into these issues because he is going to retire having never played a game in anything other than Broadway Blue. Obviously, this is not the ending he would have wanted, but in a weird sort of way, it's almost like the hockey gods were saying, this is the way that it's meant to be. And obviously, we hope that he's able to keep his heart condition in check and live out the rest of his life happy and healthy with his family, but it's a sad way to end a career, but in a lot of ways I think it's kind of fitting, for the King to maybe he's not going out on top, but in a lot of ways it's almost like he's simply passing that crown in a very ceremonious way as opposed to what a lot of other guys do, which is basically hold on to it until they die, essentially on the throne,
Fight tooth and nail for it, yeah. Well, it's like David Krejci, right? It's kind of similar. David Krejci is a guy that's he's a little younger than Lundqvist, but still is still honestly a very solid top 6 player in the NHL, but he decided rather than be less than the player he used to be to just hang up the skates and go home. You kind of have to respect it, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And for what it's worth, it's not like Lundqvist leaving is really kind of putting anyone in a bad spot. Obviously, the Rangers did what they had to do when it came to his contract and bought him out to make way for Shesterkin. So the Rangers' crease is secure for probably, I would say, at least the next 8 years or so. The Capitals, they have Vitek Vanacek, who they traded for back from the Kraken. And
along with Samsonov.
Yeah, so it's not like they're really pressed at this point for a goaltender
I really
either.
think the Capitals were just going to use him as like a 1-year cannon fodder type player, use him to shelter Samsonov a little bit, and then just use him as, like I said, fodder for the expansion draft.
Yeah. Who knows really what would have happened if Lundqvist would have played. I gotta be honest with you. I really don't think he was at the point in his career anymore where him playing would have made enough of a difference to that Capitals roster that they would have been able to
No,
really make a deep run.
he was half the player he used to be honest. At the end, like, it's what happens to most great athletes, from what I understand. Like, one day they have it and they're at the top of their game, and they don't like slowly trail off. It's just like they have it and then they don't. A lot of times you don't get to ride off into the sunset, like at the
Especially
top of your game.
especially in a position that's as tenuous as goaltending really is. You don't there's really not very much wiggle room at all when you're a goalie. Like,
Speaking of goalies retiring, didn't Pekka Rinne announce his retirement earlier this offseason?
yeah, Pekka Rinne is also done. He's going out, still playing for Nashville. So,
Again,
again,
another guy.
whose jersey's going to be retired.
I think he's a Hall of Famer.
I think he makes a good case, but I'm not entirely sure. He won't be first ballot, I don't think.
No. I just think, like, in totality of like everything he did, because the Hall of Fame also takes into account like the things he did in international ice hockey, so playing for Team Finland and all that. I agree with you. I don't think he's a first ballot Hall of Famer, but I'm just wondering if, like, somewhere down the line, because, like you said, you asked, like, what does Henrik Lundqvist mean to, like, Sweden? I can only imagine what Pekka Rinne means to Finnish ice hockey.
I mean, what does Pekka Rinne mean to the Predators? I mean, for a fan base like them, when when they went to Nashville, there was a lot of questions about the long-term sustainability of this franchise. And yes, they had Barry Trotz, who brought them to success faster than they probably should have. Yes, they had Tomas Vokoun, but really, besides Shea Weber, can you name another Nashville Predator that means as much to that franchise as Pekka Rinne did? Like, maybe Mike Fisher, but
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, between the three of them, Weber, Rinne, and Fisher, they really put the Nashville Predators in such a fantastic position to succeed from a fan base perspective that, let's be honest here, if they don't have Pekka Rinne and they have mid-tier subpar goaltending,
They're not nearly making as many playoff runs as they did.
and do they endear themselves to that community in the way that they did early on? That's another question. I mean, you could make a fairly decent argument that Pekka Rinne is as much a reason for the success of the Nashville Predators as a franchise as anybody.
Yeah. It's funny because, like, he got there almost as, like, he was almost there from day one. Like, I feel like I can't think of any other time where, like, somebody was the stone cold number one in Nashville that wasn't named Pekka Rinne.
I mean, yeah, like, the only one that they had outside of him that was starting was Vokoun, but that wasn't very long-lived, honestly. So, yeah, I mean, we're seeing kind of a transition, end of an era. A lot of these older goalies are going out. Corey Crawford is retired now. There are a lot of questions about Tuukka Rask, and does he retire?
Jonathan Quick's coming to the end.
We were so blessed with that era of goaltending that I think in hindsight we kind of took it for granted, because if we look at this future generation of goaltending, you have the big cat, you have Vasilevsky, you have Gibson, you have Shesterkin and Sorokin, just to name a few, Spencer Knight, obviously. But, the chances of all of these guys turning into as high a level as, the Carey Prices and Henrik Lundqvist and Rennes of the world, it's kind of a toss-up. It's a coin flip, I'll say. So if we really did get to see, like, a small peak of goaltending, I think. And I think 3 or 4 years down the line, we will we will.
Really get to see, whether. I guess it's kind of like. I guess I think we can think of it this way, right? It's since the 80s almost, like goaltending successively has gotten better and better and better with each coming generation, going from like Patrick Waugh to like Eddie Belfour to like Dominic Hasek and like so on and so forth. So like, have we reached like the high water mark? Like, is there anywhere else left to go, like upward for these goaltenders? Like, can they get any better? Because like with the way the game is, they're only looking to make scoring, like they're only looking to increase scoring. So you're already at a disadvantage there with the goaltender because they're looking to change the rules in direct relation to you and your position constantly. But that being said, like, can the talent level, I guess, continue to like rise to be better than these guys?
It's a hard mark. It's a hard mark to try to reach,
It's also like, can any of these guys be as good as a lot of those guys used to be, as consistently as those guys were, right? Like, even Pekka Rinne had some pretty like lackluster teams in the mid 2000s that were good defensively, but really couldn't score all that well, and he still managed to take them into the second round of the playoffs a couple of times, So it's like, are any of these guys of that same caliber? Like, can they carry lackluster teams? I mean, the argument can be made that like maybe Capo Kakkonen in Minnesota did it this year by carrying like a somewhat like iffy team, but I think he had a lot of help with Kirill Kaprizov being an absolute beast. So it's kind of hard to say, right? And John Gibson's got a bad team that's rebuilding, so he's got a really bad hand that he got dealt. Vasilevsky's also hard to judge because he's got a team that with $18 million over the salary cap.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
And they have not one but two of the top probably 25 defensemen in the league, and Ryan McDonough and Victor Hedman. And I also forgot about Sergachev. So it's like, are his numbers just inflated because of how good his team is?
Obviously at the end of the day we will see, these questions will be answered, but it's just a moment of like, wow, we really did get to see, some of the best goaltending the NHL has ever seen, flat out, bar none, period. And it all happened at the same time. I mean,
well, think about it.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just thinking about it. Like, Luongo was at his peak at the beginning of Henrik Lundqvist's career, and you got to see all those guys come of age together, Fleury, Lundqvist, and then you had guys like Holtby crop up afterwards. It was just interesting. There's so many good goaltenders. It seemed like almost no teams in the league had bad goaltenders anymore, whereas I feel like now you can look around and point at teams that have like kind of iffy goaltending and say flat out like their goaltending is just bad, whereas like back then you really couldn't.
I do think 3 years from now that the Shesterkin-Sorokin matchup will be the next, Rene Lundqvist, or Knight versus Kakkonen will be the next Quick versus Crawford. But it's just kind of like right now we're in that transitionary period, where I think the number of truly elite goalies around the league is not as high as it was during their era. If I can pick the truly elite goaltenders in the NHL right now, I would say Connor Hellebuck. I would say Andrei Vasilevsky. I would say, it's hard to say with Fleury, right? Was that like a swan song kind of year for him?
Yeah, true.
I would say truly elite. I would say Vasilevsky.
I'm trying to think.
Connor Hellebuck, John Gibson, I think is elite. He just has a garbage team.
Carey Price.
And then we have like a bunch of guys who were like, they could be
above
elite,
average, but like,
Sorokin, Shesterkin, let's give them a couple years before we start calling them elite yet. Capo Kakkonen, Spencer Knight, let's give them a couple years before we start calling them elite.
Even UC Soros, he had that great second half where he pretty much carried the Nashville Predators into the postseason. So let's see if he can keep that kind of form and see if like maybe he's the real deal, But it's hard to tell.
So,
and
yeah, Sorry, go ahead.
It's also I'm saying it's also hard to tell just because like you have this other like you have those guys who are like aren't old but feel old because they've been around for a couple of years, and you have this like fresh new crop of like 18, 19-year-old goaltenders coming over that are just going to be absolutely nasty supposedly, you know. So it's just like it's wild because you've like Jesper Wallstedt got drafted, and then
Yaroslav
Spencer Knight,
Askarov.
yeah, Yaroslav Askarov. Like there's so many like guys that are poised to be elite that I feel like they are overshadowing the guys that we have now. You know, so it's also like that's making it hard to gauge how good these guys actually are now too, because it's like you're just comparing them to the elite goaltenders who were around then and the elite goaltenders who are going to come and take that throne from them. You know.
Certainly, certainly. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. We'll see what ends up shaking out with this. Do you have any final words before we wrap up this short little podcast? Do you have any final words, I guess maybe to Henrik Lundqvist if he's listening by some miracle of God?
By some miracle God Henrik Lundqvist hears this, I think Rangers Nation like can all just wants to say thank you for the 15 years of blood, sweat, and tears, leaving it all out on the ice every night, doing everything it took to win, even when it made you kind of unpopular sometimes based on what you said or did, but you always had the best interest of the team, not necessarily the organization, but the team at heart, and that will always be appreciated. And he deserves to have his number up there with the rest of the best Rangers, because honestly, he's probably the best of them.
Oh, good.
No, it's just like it's funny because everyone always says Mark Messier is the greatest Ranger of all time, but it's like people forget he had already won 5 Stanley Cups with the Edmonton Oilers. Of course, he won the one in New York, and that's the one that he says that means the most to him. But it's like this is a guy that played 15 years wearing only that jersey, and never once did he ask to leave. Never once did he threaten to leave. He only ever wanted to be a New York Ranger. And you have to respect that. The only reason he ever left is because we gave him no choice but to leave.
Yeah. Certainly a end of an era in the NHL. So, yeah, we'll wrap up on that little note. I know that you have to head over so we can do the
Terrible Games block.
So I will put the stream in BRB mode. I will set up the game, and we will be back when Steve arrives.